Welcome to George Mason University's Studio A. My name is Rick Davis, and today our guest is Andrew Simpson, a composer and performer of music for silent films, also a composer for animation and video and opera and classical and folk music, and we'll talk about all of that in today's program. Also, Andrew's a professor of music at Catholic University. Welcome to Studio A.
Thank you, Rick. Pleasure to be here.
Great to have you here. So that was quite a menu of topics that I just threw out, which is kind of a non-traditional introduction to the world of film. Can you tell us about your background before you got interested in film?
Sure. My background was very traditional as a musician. I began, although fairly late, I was 13 when I started piano, which is a little late for the study. Yes, absolutely. However, I went to music school. I got a doctorate in music composition from Indiana University, and I was trained to write the traditional genres you mentioned: chamber music, orchestral music. I've done 4 operas, music for dance, theater, etc. So all of those things would seem to indicate that I would be a traditional concert composer. However, in 2006, I had the opportunity to play for a silent film at the National Gallery in Washington, and I substituted for another pianist, and that proved to be an amazing experience. And the rest has kind of gone from there.
So you say you substituted for another pianist.
Right.
Was this one of those showbiz stories where at the last minute the starlet gets sick and somebody else has to go on? And
well, it wasn't quite that dramatic.
No?
However, she wasn't able to play the gig. However, there was an interesting twist which happened, which was that happened to be a Belgian silent film. And I was able to see the film in advance, and so I took French in school, so I knew French, which was helpful, and so the film had the titles beneath in French. What they do at the National Gallery when they show a foreign film is have someone translate the titles for the audience over a microphone. Well, it happened to be the day that daylight savings time puts the clocks forward, and the translator forgot to put the clock forward, so the translator was late for the show. And everyone is saying, what are we going to do? How are we going to do it? And so I said, well, I could wear a lapel mic and translate the titles while I'm playing the film. And that's what I did, and I think that went well.
Wow.
So I think that was a good start to playing for film.
Yeah.
So
that's really being thrown into it in every
absolutely,
sense of the word.
Yeah.
And from there, where did this take you?
Well, I began playing more and more regularly at the gallery. And last year, I was named the resident film accompanist at the gallery. So that means when they have a silent film, I'm the person who would be the first one to play. In the interim, I had the opportunity to travel to many places. I was in Italy in 2008 to participate in the Giornate del Cinema Muto, which is one of the great film festivals of the world. And I was a participant in a masterclass for silent film musicians and played a feature film at the end of the festival. I have since that time been to Brazil and New York and LA and lots of other places to play silent film. And also, I was named house accompanist at the Library of Congress Mount Pony Theater at Culpeper, Virginia, which is, of course, how you heard me play there
which is a
recently.
Beautiful facility that
yes.
everyone in our both studio and television audience should know about in Culpeper, Virginia. It's
yes.
a national archive, essentially, of recorded sound and video and film.
That's right.
They do restoration work there,
Mm-hmm.
and they exhibit these films in this beautiful theater.
Right, exactly. And it's a 200-seat theater, and the films are free of charge to open to the public, and so it's a fantastic thing. And next month I'm going to be premiering the new theater organ in the space. Now I play on a keyboard, and we'll see this later in the program that I'm going to play for a film on the keyboard.
So you started life professionally as a composer.
Right.
What you do for the silent films is playing, sometimes improvising.
Right.
Is it more of a pianist's effort, or is it more of a composer's effort, or is it a blend?
Well, it's a little bit of all of those, because when I play for a silent film, I, as a pianist or as an organist, I am a performer, of course, because I'm playing the music, I'm improvising as I'm watching the film, but I'm also composing at the same time. And this combination of all three is this triple crown is fantastically exhilarating to do. I love the challenge of being able to put all three together at once. And
we have a brief clip actually from the Harry Langdon Lost and Found series,
yes.
which you put on CD
yes.
A couple of years ago, was it?
That's right, in 2007.
And this is Max Sennett, a highly recognized silent film producer-director, and Harry Langdon, of course, a silent film comedy star.
Exactly.
It's a brief clip, about a minute long, but it shows several of the styles, both of the silent film and the music. So let's watch this clip, then we'll talk about it. So that's really remarkable. How many times did you see? You're not playing from a score there.
That's correct.
So you're really improvising to the film.
Yeah, that was an improvised score. And for this DVD set, I was watching the film while I was playing the score. And because it's improvised, it's going to be different every time. So you have to do a complete take all the way through. This film, called The First 100 Years, is about, I think it's about a 15-minute film. So it's somewhere between a 1 and a 2 reeler. So I did 3 or 4 15-minute takes, and this happened to be the best one.
And the timing of some of the sort of the stingers and the buttons and the bell and all these things and the fall are really right on. Do you just develop sort of a sixth sense about?
You do, actually, and this is the fun thing about film. The more I do it, the more you get the sense of the rhythm of how films move. And in the scene, for example, you notice that he sets it up by saying, I hope that's the new cook. And he walks toward the door, so we know the door is going to open in just a moment. And the rhythm is almost predictable. He pauses just a moment to open the door, and then on the other side there's Louise Carver looking, really formidable. Great opportunity for a musician to underscore what that character is like.
Exactly. So it's both, it's mood, it's tempo, it's rhythm,
yes, exactly.
Atmosphere. How does this compare to how these shows would have been exhibited in their time, either in a major venue or around the country?
Right. Well, it's a good question, because silent films were always meant to be done with music. We think of a silent film, it was never that way. Depending on where you were in the country, there would be different ways to experience a film. Usually there was no soundtrack to a film. So when we talk about a film today having a soundtrack that's composed for it, that was usually not the case in the silent era. The films were simply made too quickly, and the composers couldn't keep up with the pace of production. So what would happen is a film would be sent to a theater, and if you're in a small town, you might have a pianist who's the theater pianist, or maybe you have 2 or 3 musicians, and they have a library of music, and they watch the film, and they assemble a little suite of music that's kind of go along with it. If you're in New York or a major movie house, you might have a full orchestra and a chorus and an organ, and you would have very gala musical treatments.
And does the film come packaged with any of that, or they would have to assemble that in each venue?
Well, sometimes the studios got very clever, because they released cue sheets, which were lists of things, and then they partnered with the music publishers who would produce books of music. And so Paramount would release a film and say, scene 1, romantic, we recommend this music from this book.
Yeah.
And so the musician was able to, you know, cobble things together pretty quickly.
It's actually very much like what the old 19th century theater melodramas would do.
Yes.
I remember one stage direction from a famous one which is music of impending doom.
Yeah, right.
Right? So,
Yes.
so you'd have to just
Yes.
know what that was
Exactly.
and just play it.
But see, part of that's part of what's great about, you know, film, because film and theater are really the same thing. You know, they're both events taking place on a screen, and they can be wordless acts, and music supports that.
Yeah.
You know, we don't need to be told if we hear music that sounds like impending doom.
Right.
We just sort of know
Exactly,
that it's
yes.
impending doom.
Exactly.
Or we know that music is romantic, or we know that it's a funeral march, or we know that it's some other
ballroom
kind of
scene
march.
or something like that,
Exactly.
yeah.
And music has that baggage, those associations. And a theater composer and a film composer use them in the same way. They use it to support that. And the music tells us what's happening in the scene. And that, you know, to me is one of the great, you know, tie-ins for myself, because I have done a lot of work in theater, and film is really the same impulse. It's the same kind of thing.
Great. Let's see if our students have any questions today.
Yes, hi, my name is Luigi, and my question is, what kind of recording system do you use?
It's a good question. For the both the solo films that I do, and also work with a chamber ensemble, which I'll mention a little more of in a moment, we use a very simple setup. We use a couple of wonderful Dorian microphones that a friend of ours lends us, and I have a Zoom H4 portable device, and we connect the mics to them, and then we record. We have one place where we prefer to record in the School of Music at Catholic, and we'll place the mics and do a few sound checks, and then we'll do that. We usually only use 2 mics, whether it's for piano or for a whole ensemble, because it tends to give, you know, more realistic sound. You know, it represents the space itself. The ensemble, I should mention, I have a couple of friends and colleagues, Maurice Saylor and Phil Carluzzo, who are also composers, and Maurice has really been working on me for years to do music for silent film, because he really is a huge aficionado. And so in '05, we did found an ensemble called the Snark Ensemble, which does fully composed scores for silent film. So on the DVD set that we just watched First 100 Years from, there are also scores for the Snark Ensemble, and those scores are fully written out. So when I compose for those, I have a copy of the film as a QuickTime video, which I drop into Sibelius, which is a music notation program, and I compose to that. But our audio is very simple setup.
Another question?
Hi, my name's Ashley. I understand that you played at the Lincoln Center this past year. Can you tell us about that and what it was like?
Sure. The New York Public Library for the Performing Arts has a program at Lincoln Center called Meet the Music Makers, and every year they invite a small number of silent film musicians from across the country to come and play a program of film. So I was there in April of this April, and I played for a Mary Pickford film called Little Annie Rooney, which is a delightful film which combines both comedy and tragedy really beautifully. I spoke beforehand. I talked about what a silent film musician does, and then I played the film. But it was a fantastic experience. It was a great audience, and interestingly, it was on a weekday, and it was a full audience on a weekday in New York. And it was a fantastic moment to walk through Lincoln Center Plaza, you know, to say that I'm going to be playing there. It's pretty great.
Yeah.
So it was fantastic. Yeah.
Does anybody else have a question? Yes.
What advice would you give a person thinking about composing music for film?
I think the first thing I would say was that what I do is very specialized in that it's silent film. If you're working for sound film, you know, probably the best thing to do would be to go to a program that does film music. There's one fine program on the East Coast, the North Carolina School for the Arts, but also film school programs at USC and in LA would be the place to go to do that. New York, NYU also has a fine program as well. I think that's probably the best thing to do, because that way you're working with people who work in the industry, and they are able to not only train you in the software, but also you know people. You're able to make those personal connections, and that's really important in any field. As far as being a composer, I think if you do have some experience all these things transfer if you work for, for theater, or you do something for television, or you have a friend who makes films and you do independent projects. Those are great training for that kind of thing. The more you can do of that, the better. And then I think, the best thing is to get connected with a program where you have not only support for projects, but people to help you.
Great.
That's often the best thing. Yeah.
Anybody else have a question for Andrew? Yeah.
What kinds of projects are you planning on doing in the future?
Right now, I'm working on a few large scores. I'll just confine to silent film for a large orchestra. We've been working with the Snark Ensemble, which is a 4 to 6 piece group. Now I'm interested in branching out and doing bigger films. I mentioned back in the silent era that you would have whole orchestras do silent film scores in the big theaters. I want to do that. I want to, do a couple of scores where I conduct, I get away from the keyboard, and, I have that wonderful experience. So that's my next frontier. I have 2 or 3 films picked out, and hopefully I'll be able to do those in the next couple of years, somewhere in Washington, somewhere in the area. So,
Terrific.
Yeah.
Now we're about to see a very special treat, which is you performing live to a wonderful Lillian Gish picture called Way Down East. We have about a 3-minute clip of this where you are actually performing, improvising live at the keyboard. Can you set the scene up for us a little bit?
This is a D.W. Griffith film from 1920, so it's relatively late in the silent era. The scene we're going to see is one in which Lillian Gish's character is in love with a man named Sanderson. Lillian Gish comes from a poor home, humble home, I should say, and Sanderson is a wealthy playboy. You're going to see in this scene that she believes that she's married to this guy, but in fact it isn't. He staged a sham wedding ceremony. But she comes to him with the news that, as the intertitle puts it, a tender reason why they can't keep their marriage a secret any longer. And at that point, the guy says, "Oh, well, we're not actually married." So that's the setup for the scene. But what's wonderful about it is the range of emotion. And what's great about silent film is that there are long shots, particularly of Lillian Gish, where her face tells the whole story. And the drama is told that way, through the camera just focusing on her expression. And she gradually becomes more desperate as the scene goes on. And he is trying very hard to seem unconcerned or to detach himself from this situation.
And the music will help us understand that story.
And the music, I hope, will feed into this and support it. So.
Well, let's watch.
Yeah.
That was fantastic. Yeah. Really wonderful, really wonderful job. Now,
you.
you've played this film before,
Yes.
but not lately. And
No, it's been a couple of years.
there was an obvious absence of a score in front of you at the piano.
Right.
So how are you reacting to what you're seeing on the screen?
The first thing always is to know what's happening. And if you know that, then it's what is the emotion? You know, what's the emotional world of this scene? And in this scene, you first see Lillian Gish happy because her husband has come back. I know this only because, you know, I know the film.
Right.
They're reunited, and then she breaks this wonderful news to him. And then, you know, the rest of it comes out that it wasn't a real wedding. And at first she doesn't believe him. And then there's the very heartbreaking moment when she says, "We must be married, see the ring." And that kind of naivete is so perfect for her, this very fragile state of mind that's being you know, set up against this very callous guy. And so I'm trying to play it with sympathy for her and to try to imagine what her emotions are. At first it begins happily, and then there's a moment of disbelief, and only gradually does it come into something more weighty as this thing begins to sink in.
I noticed that you sort of cast him as a bass baritone and her as a soprano. Is that a fair
Yes.
statement?
Yes, I mean, you know, there's a lot of association or baggage that comes with music, and music that is tender and higher in the register does tend to convey innocence or purity, and it's very convenient to have that lower register for the, you know, the villain,
Yeah,
if you will, of the
yeah.
piece, which he definitely is.
And there's actually a scene, a fairly extended scene in this little clip of what would be dialogue. It's a two-shot with
Yes.
both of them on the screen, and
That's
they're
right.
both clearly engaged. And I thought I heard you sort of trying to separate them a little bit sonically.
Yes, that he has you know, his point and she has hers, and that's a wonderful opportunity for a musician to try to put the music together
Yeah.
and make them literally dialogue.
And of course, you also compose for opera, so that
Right, exactly,
probably comes-
exactly.
One more question, maybe about the clip, and that is some elements of timing. Now, we saw this in the first clip from the comedy from the Max Sennett film,
Right.
with some very precise comedy, and of course, you had a chance to prepare that. This was
Yes.
improvised, and yet there
Correct.
were some moments he would sit down in the chair, and there was a. Now, be honest, was that accidental and luck, or were you sensing the rhythm of the movement?
Well, scenes do have rhythm. However, sometimes we get lucky.
Yeah.
I admit.
Right.
But also, there's an important point about what we would call Mickey Mousing. You know, sometimes in comedies, you know, like in the first excerpt when the bell rings, and so I do something that evokes the bell. That kind of thing can work very well. Certain types of films it doesn't work so well
Yeah.
for, and dramas tend not to do that. You know, normally in dramas it's better if the music provides a curtain underneath and a world in which the events take place. You can fracture the sound a bit if you try to Mickey Mouse things too
So
closely.
rather than a specific analog for each gesture or movement,
Right.
there's more of a general feeling.
Exactly. You try to evoke a general mood of what's happening, and as the scene changes, you can try to change along with it. Long shots of a character are really good for that, because there were several in that scene where you see her face really tell you everything you need to know about her emotion, and then you play music that supports it.
You've mentioned on a couple of occasions the ensemble, and you've composed some full scores
Correct.
for ensemble, which you also then conduct.
Yes.
As a conductor, how do you sync up with
Right.
the action of a film?
Right. When I perform scores with the Snark Ensemble live, it's a very different matter, because in those cases our scores are fully written out, as you point out. When we're doing it live with the film, however, we don't use a click track. The synchronization is all high wire. And I synchronize with the film, and I'll conduct the players. Now, mind you, I'm also playing, so I have to conduct when I'm not playing. And it's very tough, because we humans, every time we play a piece, we slow down a little, we speed up a little, but the film never changes speed.
Yeah.
And so sometimes you're a little ahead and you have to slow them down. You get a little behind and you have to speed them up. And the players are now used to the fact that whatever tempo we rehearsed the piece at may not be the piece, the tempo that we do in performance, because it's absolutely high wire. And the trick is just stay with the film
Yeah.
as closely as you can.
One of the appealing things about this for me is to be able to witness what silent film would have been like in its original presentation.
Yes.
It's a mixture of live and screen, and there's a sense of a living artist in the room with the film.
Exactly.
And I think it's such a valuable service, really, that the Library of Congress and you
Yes.
offer to the
Yes.
to the public. Is there a following for this kind of work?
There is. Oh, there's a very significant audience for silent film at National Gallery and Library of Congress at Culpeper and a few other venues around the country. There is a very devoted set of people who often will travel across the country to see performances. And there are festivals that are organized around the country. There's one called Slapstick-On, which is done here in Virginia every summer, and I'm one of the musical accompanists for that. There are other festivals such as Cinefest in Syracuse, where I'm playing this March, and there are others. But it's very important work because film is deteriorating every day. We're losing films because the original nitrate stock is decaying. So an archive like the Library of Congress is doing really important work in restoring these films. And then we get to show them to the public.
Yeah,
and they get to
fantastic.
experience how wonderful this genre is.
It's wonderful work, and thank you for
Yeah.
bringing that experience to us today.
My pleasure. Thank you
Great.
for having me.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I'm Rick Davis. You're watching Studio A. Thanks for watching.